Ghost Stories, the flip side. This story is Halloween Party Gone Wrong. It was Saturday afternoon on a beautiful fall day. Gary was in a good mood, anticipating the party he was throwing at his house for his friend Todd's 30th birthday. It was a costume party since Halloween was just around the corner. Gary had cleared space in the front room for dancing. Everything was ready. It would be the first party he'd had in his house. The house had been haunted, but a medium, Serafina, had exorcised the ghost for him. Although it still felt a little off in a very strange way. He would set something down, like a comb for instance, on a table or counter, and the next time he went to look for it, it wouldn't be there. He could look for it in the same spot 2, 3, 4, or even 5 times, and then, on the 6th look, the comb would magically reappear. When this happened, he swore he could hear a very faint noise, like a giggle or gum popping. And at times, Gary would feel the slightest wisp of cool silk brush his cheek. He even caught something flying by out of the corner of his eye at times, like a glimpse of the smooth edge of a bat's wing. But when he turned to look, it wasn't there. The worst. Sometimes Gary would catch brief nose bombs. The air in certain spots would smell putrid or raw.
Oh my.
Just for a few seconds. He never could track that down. But Gary liked the house in general, so he'd forced himself to get used to the strange happenings. It wasn't harmful after all, just annoying. Until the night of the party. Gary had just put on his skeleton costume when his friends Holly, Margot, and Serafina came by to help him set everything up. They all put their handbags on the chair in the front room. Holly wore a cat costume and Margot was a steampunk character. Serafina, who was dressed as the Grim Reaper, was the medium who had rid the house of the ghost earlier in the year. She pulled Gary into his home office while Holly and Margot went into the kitchen to frost cookies. Gary, I've been researching what went on at your house. Besides Elmer's ghost, I think there was a shade. What's a shade? Gary asked. It's an entity that likes to trick people. They drape themselves over objects so completely that the objects disappear. No one can see them. Then when the shade decides it's time, it moves away and the object reappears. Well, that's been happening to me all the time, Gary said. I was afraid of that. I thought we'd gotten rid of the shade, but they can come back, and sometimes there's more than one. They're very mischievous, and if they can get people to blow a fuse, they love that. I'm a little worried about what they'll do tonight. Larger groups of people seem to rile them up. Well, is there anything we can do? Gary asked. I did bring something. I'm not sure if it will work. Let's see what happens. Gary nodded, then he and Serafina joined Holly and Margot in the kitchen. Holly was talking. I know I just set it down right there. Did you see what happened to it? Margot was shaking her head. I was over here at the fridge, nowhere near it. Did it fall on the floor? Serafina walked over to Holly. What did you lose, and where was it? It was the piping tool to Frosty's cookies. It seems to have disappeared. I left it right here. Holly pointed to a blank spot on the table. Serafina said. She went up to the table and brushed her hand over the blank spot. It felt smooth and even. She dug her fingernails into the spot and pulled back. Then she jumped back. It stung me, she yelped. What stung you? Holly asked. The countertop? I don't know. Maybe there was some bleach left there from cleaning it, Serafina said. Gary, do you have a minute? They went into the living room. Wait, these things sting? Gary asked as soon as they were out of earshot of the others. Do they stink too? Because sometimes I get a whiff of something really rancid.
Oh
Well, I
my.
did find one reference to both of those things in my research on shades, Seraphina said thoughtfully. But I didn't know if it was true. The shade that was teasing your ghost didn't do that. Gary was staring at her, wild thoughts going through his head. So if that shade wasn't the putrid, smelly stinger, does that mean there's more than one? They've never stung me. Why start now? I think there may be a few shades here, Seraphina said. Maybe that one stung me because I challenged it. Let's hope they settle down for the party. Gary stared at her, dubious. Do you have any way to get them out of here before anyone else comes? Just then the doorbell rang. Seraphina glanced at Gary as he went to the door. I guess the guests are arriving. Let's see if anything more happens and deal with it then, she said. Todd arrived dressed as a mime, followed by John dressed as Frankenstein. Soon the party was in full swing. Gary was on high alert for any shenanigans from the shades, but by 10 p.m. it looked like they decided not to show. Gary was relieved. Not so fast, Gary. At 10:15 p.m., Todd exclaimed, Hey, who took my drink? Margot made it for me special. No one would admit to the drink theft. Where did you set it down, Todd? Gary asked him. Right here. I turned around to talk to Holly, and when I turned back, it was gone. Todd replied. There was a slight waft of a putrid odor as Gary turned to where Todd was gesturing. Here, I'll make you another one. Sounds like it was a popular drink. Margot made another drink and handed it to Todd. 5 minutes later, Todd was fuming. That's not funny. Quit stealing my drinks, everyone. John said, Maybe you've had enough if you keep losing your drinks. That really set Todd off. I haven't had anything to drink. Someone keeps taking it. And who keeps dropping the butt bombs around here? I can hardly breathe. It stinks so bad. That just made everyone laugh. I give up, Todd yelled. The party went on, and Todd switched to beer, which he seemed able to hang on to. Around 1 or 2 a.m., the party started to wind down. That's when things got a little hairy. None of the women could find their handbags. They were all in this chair, Margot said. Ooh, what's that smell? She pinched her nose as she felt around on the chair for the handbags, but they didn't seem to be there. They all searched the house. Gary even let them look in his bedroom, but the handbags were nowhere to be found. Gary, what's going on? They all stood in a group, looking at him accusingly. Gary glanced at Seraphina. I'll tell them, she said. This house is infested with shades. Everyone looked at her like she was insane. Let me finish. Shades are nasty little entities that hide things from people. They love making people mad. Gary's been dealing with them all along in this house, and they've been active, but not as active as right now. I can assure you all that your handbags are in this house. They're just covered up by the shades. Everyone started talking. Hold on, Seraphina said. I thought this could happen, and I have a solution that may work. Are you crazy? John asked. What kind of horsepucky is this? Just please be patient. I have to get something from my car. I'll be right back, Seraphina said. If you knew this was going to happen, why didn't you bring it inside in the first place? John asked. Seraphina glared at him. So the shades could hide it? That would have been really stupid. She traipsed out to her car, Holly with her. Seraphina, is this what Gary was talking about at the bar that night a few months ago, the night I called you? She asked. Yes, but I didn't realize how serious it was then. I've since researched it, and we have got to get rid of these things, Seraphina said as she rummaged in the trunk of her car. I may need your help. Can you hold these supplies and not let go even if you feel a cold breeze or a touch or even a sting? Holly gulped, then agreed. They took the supplies into the house where the guests were arguing. The jovial mood of earlier totally dissipated. See, this is what the shades love. They love to confuse people and to set people on each other out of anger. That's why we have to get them out, Serafina said. She asked everyone to gather in one corner of the living room. Then she asked Holly for the bag she was holding. As Holly handed Serafina the bag, it started to disappear. But Serafina grabbed it quickly and tightly. Red welts from stings appeared on Serafina's hand as the bag shimmered in and out of view, but she still held on firmly. She dipped her hand into the bag and pulled out a powdery red substance. Serafina threw the red powder on the chair where the handbags had been. Everyone gasped as 4 shapes appeared, then lifted into the air. They looked like rags with eyes about the size of a used dishcloth. When the group looked back at the chair, there were the missing handbags. "We're not done yet. I know there's at least one more," Serafina said. Then she flung some powder into the air. The guests gasped as 2 more shades appeared, coated in the red powder, flying around near the ceiling. The other 4 shades joined them. They seemed to be trying to shake off the powder, like it really irritated them. They grew more and more agitated, buzzing around like angry bees. As the bewildered guests watched, the shades sprouted lethal-looking stingers and started dive-bombing them. Bob tried to fight a nasty-looking shade, but his fist went right through it without doing any damage at all. The shade, however, managed to get a direct hit on his arm, where a red welt immediately rose up. Margot swung her purse at the one nearest her, but that didn't work either. The thing just grew a mouth that grinned at her. Then it swooped. She narrowly avoided a nasty sting by contorting her body out of the way. For once, her yoga lessons came in handy. The guests ran around the room, ducking and weaving to avoid the painful stings from the shades. Tables were overturned. Drinks and popcorn went flying. This only served to spur the shades on. Holly tried ducking behind an overturned table, but a shade flew right through it and stung her nose. Total bedlam had broken out. While the guests fought off the shades, Serafina pulled strands of gold-colored netting from a bag. She motioned to Gary and John. "Grab them when I've encased them." Then she flung the netting over the shades, one by one, until all of them were caught. The shades fought back, but Serafina was stronger. Her hands, arms, and face were covered with red welts by the time she was done. Gary and John followed her and gathered the trapped shades up, twisting and turning to avoid their nasty stings. They both had welts on their hands by the time they were done. "What is that stuff?" Gary asked. "It's gossamer netting. It's rare, but I was able to get some. It's one of the few things that works against shades," Serafina replied. Gary and Serafina gathered the trapped shades in the living room by the front door, while the shocked guests looked on in horror. Serafina held on to the bottom of the nets, trapping them. It looked like she was holding a bloom bouquet, albeit a bouquet full of shades. She glared at the shades, then shook the bouquet and spoke to them. "I'll let you go if you promise to leave this house and not come back. If you do come back, it will be much worse for you next time. Do you understand?" The shades just stared at her. "I said, do you understand? Put your stingers away if you agree." The shades reluctantly pulled their stingers in, some more slowly than others. Serafina directed her glare to the last shade to pull its stinger in. "I have my eye on you. You better not come back." The shade just blew a pink bubble and popped it in Serafina's face. "I'll take that as a yes. You're not to bother Gary again." Serafina took the shades outside, then released them. They shook off the red powder and flew up into the night sky, but they stayed visible so she could get a good look at them as they grinned and taunted her. They faded slowly from sight until only their eyes and evil grins remained. Finally, those winked out, too. All except for one shade, the one blowing the bubble gum, who stayed near Gary and very slowly faded from view until she was nearly too faint to be seen anymore. After that, it was time to go home. Everyone left the party a little shaken, but all in one piece, thank goodness. Their welts were all gone, so there was no lasting damage. The next day, Gary phoned all of his friends to apologize and make sure they were okay. He talked to Todd first. Todd was ecstatic. Apologize? Dude, that was the greatest party of all time. How did you do that? Best birthday ever. What did you use to make the welts? It made it seem so real. Todd raved on and on. The other guests had similar responses. Well, except for Serafina, who was exhausted but relieved that they'd finally cleared the shades out of Gary's house. So that was the end of it. Or was it? The next day, Gary felt the slightest caress of cool silk on his cheek and heard the faint sound of a bubble pop near his ear. Some party!
Oh my.
Well, Fiona Fabblestable here, ghost and ghost representative. I'm here in the afterlife with a shade I call Bubble Brat. Firstly, Bubble Brat, what were all those shades doing in Gary's house? I got lonely before Gary moved in, so I invited them. But they got mad after the party and they left for good. Bubble Brat, why didn't you leave too? Why should I? Well, maybe because Gary doesn't want you around to tease him all the time. Two things, Miss Nosy. First, you don't get to make that call. Second, that's my house. I was there first. Why should I leave? And if Gary wants to share my house, then he has to provide some amusement for me. I think he secretly likes me. I think there's something more. What's number 3, Bubble Brat? Well, Gary is kind of cute. And he's really cute when he's mad. And he doesn't have smelly breath like that old man that used to live there. But don't you miss all the other shades that used to be there? Nah, I got sick of them. Most of them were mean and really stinky. A couple were okay, though. But I'm glad they're gone. Besides, I invited them before I had Gary. I don't need them now. But where did they go? Well, Smelly Stan went to torment Wayne in Philly. Crazy Katie went to Seattle to bother Lily. And Putrid Pete followed Todd to London to watch him explode. He said Todd's temper made him an easy mark. But he'll get bored soon and find someone else. I don't know about the others. Are we done now? And remember, I only said I'd do this so you wouldn't tell Serafina I'm still living with Gary. You promised. Yes, I promised. Thank you, Bubble Brat. Well, there you have it. This has been Ghost Stories The Flip Side. I'm Fiona Fabblestable, and we'll see you next time.